Hi, my name is Sarah Trimble. I am the founder and CEO of the Job Applicant Perspective, the first anonymous user reviews for job ads across the U.S. This is a level of go-to-market awareness. I'm aware that it's not as polished as it could be, but when pushing a paradigm shift, there's a lot to do. So you get the word out the way that you can, and you improve as you go. Today I'm going to read one of my blog posts from Substack. And you're welcome to follow it in written format. Also, I do TikTok videos and I make little podcasts, like 5-10 minute clips on these sorts of things too. I check out the Job Applicant Perspective on Substack, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Facebook, and TikTok, as well as our website. Excuse me, I have a little bit of cold today. Today's article is called Bonhoeffer's Principle and the Online Labor Market: How You Can't Rate the Food When You Never Listen to Diners. The architect in the blind spot. I'd like to take a moment to set the academic context for my next economic observation on the online job market. As a proud neurodivergent, my brain defaults to truth in complex systems, and I want to honor myself, my startup, and the fields I draw from by positioning my skill set where it actually lies instead of where it doesn't. I am not a traditionally trained economist, sociologist, or theologian, and I would argue that has been my superpower in this particular case. My lack of formal expertise is almost precisely why someone like me identified this collapse for what it was, started tracking the causes, and the reason the experts missed it. There is a reason rookie detectives often crack cold cases. They start from the beginning. To my knowledge, no one has taken a socio-theological principle and applied it to economics to explain the dysfunction of modern digital labor markets. That absence is what I mean to address right now. When trying to understand this online hiring market, or more accurately, our misunderstanding of it, we have to look at what we've built. Economists optimize for dashboards, platforms optimize for churn, policymakers relied on broken signals, and the one perspective that could have revealed the cracks, job seekers, were structurally excluded from every model. This exclusion is astonishing when you consider that job seekers' unpaid movements, time, and energy are the engine powering the entire system. To understand why this labor market collapse was invisible to institutions and why we've built a $1 trillion system blind to their own basic market dysfunction, I turn to a principle articulated decades ago by one Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer wasn't describing a failure of intellect. He was describing a failure of perspective. You can have the smartest minds in the room, the most sophisticated models, the most rigorous dashboards, but if the perspectives of the people inside the system are excluded, the models will be blind by design. Brilliance does not replace the vantage points that you opt out of measuring. Bonhoeffer warned us, when you collapse the perspectives you don't want to see, you design systems incapable of perceiving their own harm. That's exactly what we did when we moved hiring online. By erasing the signals from the very people powering the system, we blinded the models, the policies, and the platforms, leaving us with dashboards that looked healthy while the market itself quietly destabilizes beneath them. Who this is for? Job seekers have been applying into black holes and blaming themselves when the system failed them. Small business owners have been priced out of visibility by platforms designed to favor national brands. Journalists and policymakers who want to understand why record openings didn't translate into real hiring. Economists and investors who are tracking trust collapse and structural dysfunction beneath the illusion of prosperity. Number 2, section 2, the hiring market's one-sided mirror. For the last 2 decades, labor market economists and policymakers have relied almost exclusively on one-sided signals. Job postings assumed to represent real demand. Wages assumed to represent worker leverage. ATS analytics assumed to represent efficiency. Platform dashboards assumed to represent truth. Meanwhile, platforms like Indeed, LinkedIn, and Greenhouse weren't measuring hires at all. They were measuring engagement, not outcomes. Their incentive was to maximize churn, not matches. But job seekers were living in an entirely different reality. Ghost jobs, roles posted endlessly but never filled, broken funnels, resumes uploaded into ATS black holes, scams, duplicates, and fake ads designed to drive clicks and harvest data, exhaustion and disengagement after 300 plus unanswered applications. Those signals, the lived experience of the people inside the system, were erased from the models entirely. And when you ignore the only people who can see the cracks forming, the system becomes blind to its own basic market dysfunction. Think about it like this. When you've already convinced yourself that the very people licking the watches cannot be trusted, you never realize when you're creating an economic radium girl situation at scale. The Great Gaslighting. This wasn't just an academic failure. It became a policy failure, a media failure, and ultimately a cultural failure. Policymakers leaned on false prosperity narratives, inflated job postings, platform-fed metrics to justify cutting unemployment aid and withdrawing pandemic supports. Economists blamed worker disengagement and laziness when the real culprit was trust collapse in a system running on fake signals. Media outlets amplified the "nobody wants to work" storyline without questioning who controlled the underlying data, frequently citing reports and dashboards produced by platforms like Indeed's Hiring Lab or LinkedIn's Economic Graph, whose business models profit from churn. Millions of people were actively harmed by this disconnect. But worse, they were gaslit into believing the harm was their fault. Families drained their savings, parents carried shame they didn't earn, communities fractured under narratives blaming individual work ethic for structural dysfunction. This is why when the latest job report was shared, many saw terrible numbers as a relief. Their economic prospects hadn't changed, but the system's metrics finally aligned with their lived reality, bringing the possibility of expanded empathy from those in authority. The 5-star restaurant nobody eats at. Here's the metaphor. Imagine a city where the economy depends on the restaurants working well. The critics rate every restaurant based on how many plates leave the kitchen, not on the quality of the food. Chefs, eager for good ratings, start sending out empty plates, duplicate plates, fake plates. The critics looking only at the kitchen dashboards publish glowing reviews. Record-breaking output. Food supply at historic highs. Meanwhile, diners are walking out starving. When they complain the critics dismiss them, people today just don't want to eat. That's the online labor market. Economists rate the restaurant 5 stars. Platforms optimize for plates served, and job seekers, the diners, were locked out of the conversation entirely. By excluding the diners' perspectives, the critics failed to notice the kitchen was on fire. The consequence of perspective collapse. Collapsing job seeker perspectives didn't just distort our models, it manufactured generational trauma. Shame and precarity. People internalize systemic failure as personal inadequacy, eroding confidence and dignity. Debt and instability. Families drained savings, borrowed heavily, and delayed milestones like buying homes or having children. Institutional distrust. When reality diverges this sharply from the institutional narratives, people disengage from economists, policymakers, and democracy itself. Policy paralysis. We've optimized for clicks, churns, and dashboards instead of matches, trust, and stability. This isn't just about hiring. It's about how we build collective meaning. When dashboards replace lived signals, we manufacture cultural blind spots that destabilize trust itself. This isn't just a labor market problem anymore. It's a democratic stability problem. A call for reintegration. We cannot keep pretending a market is healthy when we only measure one side of it. A hiring system built without job seeker perspectives isn't a functioning market at all. It's a narrative illusion, extracting value from the very U.S. labor force it was built to serve. A hiring market is financially aligned only when both sides, employers and job seekers, shape the signals and influence the incentives that drive platform outcomes. The profit is in the pain with only one side. It's in the solution with both. This isn't a call to burn institutions down. It's a map of how collapsing job seekers' perspectives created systemic blind spots and why we're headed towards social fracture unless someone starts integrating the harm we've ignored. To repair trust, we need to reintegrate the signals we erased. Models including job seeker data, ghost jobs, dead funnels, hiring scams, disengagement rates, policies. Stop relying on platform-fed metrics, my God. Fund independent audits and outcome-based reporting. Platform design build transparency into hiring pipelines. Prioritize verified outcomes over engagement. A two-sided hiring market built on trust, not clicks, is the only way forward. Without reintegration, we'll keep repeating this cycle. Structural blindness, systemic harm, democratic instability. See the research. I put, again, more research there about algorithmic hiring, inefficiency paradox, two-sided Jevons paradox, why making matches cheaper produces more chaos. These papers connect the dots between platform incentives, trust breakdown, and policy misalignment, showing why online hiring has just stalled. It's broken entirely. We can track fiscal year reports from LinkedIn and Recruit Holdings, who owns Indeed and Glassdoor, and compare those with stagnant hiring rates, as I did in my last post, as previous post from that. And we can also watch the language on LinkedIn and Reddit forums shift over the last 15 years to get some space to verify the truth of these claims. However, the most compelling evidence for this systemic collapse is not found in a traditional data set because the necessary data set does not exist. And that absence is the heart of this failure. When we moved the labor market from the newspaper to online, we dropped all trust mechanisms for half the market and well over 95% of the users. We built a financial system for labor on top of platforms that were never required to measure truth, only engagement. The burden is on the architects of this system to prove their metrics are valid. They cannot. The validation loop is closed, excluding the very reality it claims to represent. The true scandal is that institutions tasked with oversight accepted platform-derived metrics born from business models that profit from churn as proxies for market health. They outsourced their duty to measure the American labor market to entities whose incentives are fundamentally misaligned with that goal. The unemployed in the online job market have never once been failed employees, but instead unprotected consumers in the labor force's version of the stock market, access to financial security and socioeconomic mobility. And the SEC would shut this financial market down in a heartbeat. The billions extracted from the unwitnessed, unpaid time and movements of 160 million Americans over the last 25 years in a market they cannot opt out of. It represents one of the largest unacknowledged transfers of value in modern labor history. When class action lawsuits and the receipts are finally measured, the scale of the extraction will be impossible to ignore. We built the job applicant perspective to start addressing the problems these platforms have created. Expose ghost jobs. Job seekers report scams, duplicates, and dead funnels in real time. Restore transparency. Verified reviews give candidates signal, not fog. Help small businesses compete. Local roles get visibility without paying the engagement tax. A hiring system cannot function without two-sided trust. TJAP is rebuilding the layer they ignored. Takeaway: a market is a market is a market is a market, and the financial stock market for the labor force, their access to financial safety and socioeconomic mobility will never stabilize the American economy until we ground it, at minimum, in the same reputational mechanisms and trust architecture that protects every other marketplace. Until we measure what matters, the dysfunction isn't a glitch, it's the design. And a hiring market financially aligned on both sides isn't radical, it's inevitable. Thank you.